Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and listen to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire and motivate you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Visit CYACYL.com.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Just about 1 month ago, a gunman walked into an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, and killed 20 children and 6 adults, including the school's principal. For a brief time, all eyes were focused on that small New England town. Now, as time passes and the holidays are over, people are trying to return to their lives. The tragedy thrust many of us into intense grief, with feelings of deep loss and despair. Trying to come to terms with the how and why of such a horrific event can be overwhelming. Often old wounds are opened and moving past the pain may seem impossible. As adults, we must find a way to manage our own emotions while helping our children understand what happened, cope with the event, and move forward. David Kessler, one of the most well-known experts on grief and loss, joins us today to offer advice about how to cope with grief so we can put the pieces of our life back together. David co-authored 2 bestsellers with Elisabeth Kübler Ross on grief and grieving and life lessons. His first book, The Needs of the Dying, is a #1 best-selling hospice book that received praise from Mother Teresa. David's work has been featured on CNN, NBC, and PBS. He's written for the Boston Globe, the Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal, and Anderson Cooper. Welcome, David. Thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
David, as I said in the introduction, it's about a month now since the Newtown tragedy, and immediately following that event, the media was there night and day, and we were so focused on helping the families and being a part of this horrific tragedy. And now as time has passed and people are trying to resume some normalcy, is it possible for us to move forward from something that was so tragic?
Well, I think one of the keys is that for those of us who weren't there and aren't personally involved is to sort of never forget what happened, to take whatever action is appropriate in our life to ensure that doesn't happen. But for those who live there, their work is just beginning. You know, that time, as you mentioned, when the media and everyone was there, was really what we call acute grief. I mean, they were still in shock. For the next year, those parents, that city, they're just going to be coming to grips with what happened and really beginning their work. We sort of live in a get-over-it society that people think, a month later, I'm sure they're done with it. And most of us know if we've ever lost someone, the real work's just beginning.
I think that's really a key. I've gone through grief. I've lost both of my parents and a sister. And when you're having it happen at that moment, that's when so many people are around you. And it's really, as you're saying, when you start to go down the road a little bit in time, that you feel that loss, that hole is in your life that you're trying to fill.
And that you're just realizing that child's never coming back. That teacher's never, ever coming back.
Now, David, immediately after the tragedy, you and Dr. Oz went and spent some time with the families.
Yes. I spent most of my time with the families who had kids in the school and with those kids who survived. And I will tell you at that time, it's hard for them to comprehend what had happened. When kids even have more trouble at that age, the kids were sort of, they knew that their friend had died, they knew their friend had gotten shot, but there's almost a sense, but I'll see them when we get back to school. And, kids don't realize all that has been lost. Where their parents realize they're never going to see those teachers again, those kids are never going to have another birthday, another Christmas. So the parents were doing worse at that time than the kids were.
The reason that I started off by asking if we can ever expect to have some type of normalcy, because I know following grief, we do usually return to some type of routine in our lives, but in a situation like this, when there was so much brutality involved, that's why I was really wondering if they can ever really expect to get past that anger and those feelings of, I don't know, it just seems so much worse because of the situation, the way that these children died.
Absolutely. And, they will find a routine again. They will find a new normal for them. However, what you're saying is very true. I mean, this is an event that's going to have impact over generations. You know, these kids who survived, their siblings of the kids who died, the parents, I mean, it will impact their kids.
What about the rest of us? I mean, I'm in New Jersey, but yet I feel like I'm going through it with them. Why do you think we all feel so connected to this?
Well, a number of things. We have what's called identification. Many of us have kids. Many of us remember our kids when they're young. We know schools. We know what that feels like when we were in school, to sort of be in that safety of elementary school and to picture what that would be like to have it violated so brutally. And the other thing is that public grief is real grief. You know, we see things as they unfold live on TV. We see parents' authentic emotions as they're happening. We see the loss. So it's not like a vicarious loss. It's actually a loss we truly become a part of.
This was so different for so many people. I think it was a couple of days after it took place. I was in the studio and I had a guest come in and we started to talk about it. And within about 5 minutes, we were both crying. And it was something, as I said, we're removed from it, but yet it feels like we really had it happen to us. And I've personally never experienced anything of that magnitude in an event.
Well, it's a very haunting experience. I mean, just from, you know, the little bit I've been a part of it. Literally last night I was, you know, at a restaurant and there was just a little kid playing by us who was about that age, and I just couldn't help think about, you know, him going to school and something horrific like that happening. You are haunted by these thoughts of what happened. That's actually normal. That's one of the keys here. You know, sometimes people will say, even people who are deeply involved, like first responders, they might say, I'm having nightmares. Is that bad? What's going on? And I'll reassure them that actually the idea you're having nightmares about something so horrific is a really good normal response. If someone worked with all that and then said they were sleeping well, I would be worried.
Can you take us through the stages of grief? Because as you're saying, we need to feel what we're going through because, like you said, if you are sleeping and if you're not dealing with the emotions, that's when you really have to be concerned.
Right.
So what are these 5 stages that all of us are going through at this point?
Well, there's denial. That's that acute stage when you can't believe something so horrific like this is happening or has happened in our world, in our country, in these kids' lives, in that elementary school, in that town. Then after denial begins to fade, we go into anger. We get angry about this, and how could this have happened, and it's so wrong, and these are innocent kids, and it's the horrible time of year, and it just, you know, everything about it brings up our anger. Then we go into what's called the bargaining stage. What if we had had armed guards there? Would that have made a difference? If we had had better mental health for this gentleman, would that make a difference? We start going back and bargaining what ifs. Then eventually we get to depression, and that's, you know, that stage where, especially for their parents and those kids in school, they realize these young kids and those 6 adults are never, ever, ever coming back. And that's a tough realization, and that brings on an acute depression. Then after that, we go into an acceptance stage. And acceptance is not that you like it or you're okay with it. It's just that you acknowledge the reality of the loss. Now, one of the things that's important to say about those stages is we don't follow the stages. The stages reflect where we are. They're not necessarily linear. Not everyone will go through anger. Not everyone is in denial. The stages are as unique as we are. So just know they're very personal. Kübler Ross, you know, always used to say, they're just to help normalize what we're going through, but they're not a map you have to follow.
And I would imagine that any one of these could be occurring simultaneously.
And over again. You're so right.
And they can go on for years.
And for those parents and people in that town, they absolutely will.
David, I would think that looking at the steps that you just mentioned, getting stuck in the anger or the bargaining steps, that really would not serve us well, would it?
Well, what you want to do is you want to be able to express these emotions, so you want to be able to get the anger out without hurting people or hurting things. So you want to find constructive ways to express that anger. That may be, doing something politically and motivating yourself. It could be just exercising. It could be boxing, whatever it is for you to sort of externalize those feelings.
What about the first responders? I mean, these men and women saw things that no one should ever have to see in a lifetime. How do they deal with the post-traumatic stress?
Well, hopefully they'll have some help. I'm certainly hoping to go back in a few months once they sort of are past the acute stage. They need to get help. They need to realize what will be normal for them. Just like I mentioned some of those things, like nightmares, to realize that those should occur. Those are normal. That people will be a bit haunted. That, they'll have sleep pattern problems. They'll have eating pattern problems. Just to know that changes will occur, and that's sort of what happens.
And when these things are happening, it's all perfectly normal, and they should not become alarmed.
True, and they should certainly seek out support, and I'm sure they will receive lots of that.
David, we need to take a break for this week's Good Life Tips. Stay with us for information to help you make the positive life changes that we talk about on the show. Welcome back to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman, and our guest today is grief expert and author David Kessler. David, we've been discussing the tragedy that occurred about a month ago in Newtown, Connecticut. And one of the major concerns that a lot of parents are dealing with is, how do we talk to our children about such an event? How do we make them feel safe and secure? And how do we help them deal with this type of grief?
Great questions. Well, we want to let them know that even though this has happened, it's a very rare occurrence. And for most part in the world, they are safe. And we talk about, here's the things that your school does around safety, and here's what mommy and daddy do around you to keep you safe, and to reassure them that while bad things do happen in the world, they are pretty safe. And the best thing we can do is to manage our own emotions. Even when I was talking to one parent there, they were saying they had a child who survived from the school, and they said, how will I ever be able to drop my child off at school? And one of the things that parents are always at risk for is to leaving their kids to deal with their emotions. Meaning that, if I'm going to have a horrible time dropping my kid off and just be in tears, I need to work through that with adult help. We shouldn't put that on our kids. It's almost like, when you're on a plane, put your oxygen mask on first, manage your own feelings, then help your child.
David, as parents, we often try to shield our children from these types of events, and we censor what they pay attention to and what they hear. But there's always that child that comes into class who is so wise beyond his or her years that likes to let everybody know what they know. How can we shield our child when they're getting the information out on the streets?
Well, it's important to know, while we do our best to monitor what goes into our child's world, we also want to help them receive and interpret what they hear. So it's not just us framing and telling them what happened. It's also after they go to school. So what's everyone talking about in school? Hey, what did your friends say about it? And sort of really hear from them what their friends said. And if their friends said they made a joke or said something goofy, to sort of not react in a way that makes your kid not feel good about sharing, but just to go, oh, that's really interesting information. A part of what your friend said isn't quite correct. Let me tell you exactly what did happen. And just help correct some of those misperceptions kids may get from friends.
David, I read where you said that it's important to be proactive and find ways to help. Why is that so important in healing?
It's interesting. We don't really know why activity works, but it does. There was a case years ago of a CYACYL bus incident out here in California where kids were kidnapped and buried alive, and they were ultimately rescued. And one of the kids decided to dig, and even though his digging did not result in the rescue, as they've tracked these kids over the years, he's the one kid that did not come down with post-traumatic stress. There's something about doing something active in the face of tragedy that empowers us and helps us.
Someone had written into me, and they had said that they lost a child recently, and they actually had someone say to them, snap out of it and get over it. Is it possible to just get over it? I mean, isn't that the worst thing that someone can say to somebody in grief?
Absolutely, and I hope people have a chance to check out the website I run, grief.com. It talks about the worst things to say in grief. It also talks about some things to help kids. But it's very, very true. The reality is we don't ever get over loss. We learn to live with the person we've lost. But we will always have that hole in our heart for where their soul resides. It's not like a cold or a flu that one day we all feel better. Instead, we just learn that that loss is a part of who we are, and we will love and remember that child forever.
And David, how important is the love and support that you show? As we said in the beginning, there was an outpouring of love from all around the world for the families in Newtown. Even just on a personal level, how important is it to show support to someone that's going through crisis?
Well, it's very important. However, the other thing that's important about that is to know, whether it's your neighbor next door or a tragedy across the country, that we show up big in those first weeks, in that first month, and then oftentimes our neighbor or our loved one, after a loss, is sort of left to their own isolation. So while it's truly important to show up when it first happens and keep that person busy, it's also important at the 3-month mark, at the 6-month mark, throughout that first year, to really check in on our friends, on our loved ones, take them out, have coffee, dinner, whatever is right for you, to keep them connected to the world.
And also, I would think it's important to keep them talking.
Absolutely, and it's so important and primal to tell that story over and over, and people will repeat it, but that's part of their healing.
What about talking about the person that you've lost? I know some people almost pretend like that person never existed. Is that healthy, or is it a better option to keep that person alive by speaking about the good and bad times shared?
Absolutely, and it will naturally dissipate a little over the years, but we never forget. And just the idea that you might light a candle for them at Christmas or over the holidays and just remember them and talk to people about them. You know, one of the most beautiful things, I like to write a bit about Mother's Day, because that's such a hard day for people who have lost their mother. I remember once someone calling up after someone had lost their mother and said, "I'm going to call you every Mother's Day and we're going to talk about your mother." And just things like that are really beautiful offerings.
David, you just mentioned a website that our listeners can visit to get more information. What is that site again, and where else can they go to learn about you and your books?
It's grief.com. And from there, they can connect to my Facebook page. They can connect to my Twitter page. I made a comment on your Facebook page today, so they can find me there, because I love to connect with people, so I hope they will reach out.
So again, you can reach David Kessler on grief.com, or as always, you can visit our website, CYACYL.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our site, listen to past shows as podcasts, read the digital magazine, sign up for our mailing list, take part in the book club, and be sure to follow the show on Facebook and Twitter. David, in our final minutes, what would you like the listeners to walk away with from this interview? What is the most important thing that they need to remember?
Well, we're now in a new year, and I think for those of us that weren't directly affected, there's some lessons we can learn about how precious time is and how precious our loved ones are. And, you know, we often get caught up in the little small details of life, but when you lose someone you love, it reminds us what really matters, the love we share. So I always try to use it in a new year as a message to sort of think about those people in my life. How can I be a more loving, kinder person to them? And to me, that's the greatest gift we can give those who have left us.
David, thank you so much for joining us today. As I said in the beginning of the interview, this tragedy in Newtown was something that impacted me in a way that I've never experienced before. And I want the families in Newtown to know that all of us here at Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life send our love and our prayers to the victims, their families, and everyone within that community. And hopefully some of the information that you've shared with us today can help them move forward and to heal from such a tragic event. This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.